All right, welcome. AJ, how are you?
I'm doing great, Al. How are you?
I'm doing real well. Thanks for joining me today. I am very excited to be discussing this topic. I know it's been a massive challenge for you all there at Cleveland Clinic to deal with the healthcare crisis during the pandemic. And I know just the innovative work that you've had to create with your colleagues there has been an inspiration to me as I've become to learn about it. So I'm excited that you're open to share with the community. So if you would, please share a little bit about who you are and your role there at Cleveland Clinic.
Sure. Pleasure to be here. My name is AJ Herrmann, Executive Director of Strategic Workforce Planning at Cleveland Clinic. A relatively new role and a relatively new team. This was a realization based on the past few years of what the healthcare industry has been going through, that the talent markets and the need for human capacity was just outstripping supply. And being in that crisis of the past 2 years has really brought home that we don't want to be in a crisis like that forever. We want to get ahead of it. And healthcare is very good at dealing with the crisis of the day and the crisis of the near future. But looking beyond that is really what my leaders at Cleveland Clinic determined we need to do. We need to look over the horizon. As some other industries have been doing pretty well for a while, we wanted to be the leader in healthcare at looking down the road in terms of our workforce. So we've stood this program up from scratch over the past year, and it's already become, I think, a real feather in the cap of Cleveland Clinic. So we're hoping to keep going.
Well, let's get right into it
Yeah.
because a couple quotes that have really impacted me since we've talked about doing the show together is you could not there at Cleveland Clinic, given the shortage of talent in healthcare specifically, you could not hire yourselves out of this, nor could you retain yourselves out of this crisis. So what then did you do with that realization?
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of turning traditional strategic workforce planning on its head, I think, where as it's been created, it relied heavily on proactive hiring, or creative hiring, or increasing an employee value proposition. But what we've found, and others in this industry know, we can't hire our way out of this because there are not enough people. And when we look at the local talent pool for Cleveland Clinic, if you're a medical professional in our area, you probably already work here, so and that's just the way it is. And it goes across industries, but if you look at the data that the Department of Labor puts out, healthcare is particularly acute in the ratio of applicants to vacancies. It's something like you need 4 healthcare vacancies to have 1 applicant, and that's unsustainable for what we're going through, but it's certainly not built for growth, right? Because clinical healthcare provision, the demand is only going up as the population gets older, as places like Cleveland Clinic grow in a business sense. So right, we could not hire our way out of the crisis. And traditionally with workforce planning, you say, okay, so we have to keep our current people. So we, bolster retention efforts, which has been very difficult as the past 2 years, sort of a perfect storm for the stress that our clinical staff, especially nurses, have been going through. Even if we retain, upskill, job sharing, some of those traditional levers that strategic workforce planning has always pulled, if we do both of those things perfectly, we'll still be short. We'll still have a capacity gap, is how I would like to say it. Not built for growth and not built to get out of the crisis, to get out of a crisis place. So where our department, my team, we think of it differently, that we pull those levers, but then after we pull those levers, we look at the roles themselves and we break them down. It's what we would call technology and redesign. So if we can't find more humans to do the work from external, and we can't keep more humans doing the work or retrain folks that we already have internally, you got to think about what are the tasks that job accomplishes, and does a human have to do it, and does that human have to do it? It's role redesign. It's breaking down a role into its individual tasks and then asking yourself two questions. Well, three questions, really. Is this an essential task? Do we need to be doing this? Does this person need to be doing this? Could it be done by someone else that we already have? Could it be combined with another role? And then thirdly, technology is coming faster than we can absorb it. Is there either automation or human augmentation that could take care of that task? Not replace that human, but perhaps make that task either easier or completely automated to free up capacity. And then once we do that, then we look at what are the skills that are required for our workforce to make that change, to adapt to that. So, it requires a very future focus. This is not, some people think of strategic workforce planning as next quarter or next year. I would call that operational workforce planning. We are looking multiple years into the future to do work like that. I think one phrase that's been here in the community recently, which is, more work, fewer jobs, right? How do we get to a place that recognizes that the amount of work that organizations will have to accomplish, tasks that we'll have to accomplish, is not going down, and the work that we're doing is not getting simpler, but we are reaching a point where we can't always say, oh, more work equals more people, right? Because the math just doesn't add up anymore. So that's the perspective we're trying to take. We pull the traditional levers of workforce planning, we optimize it, because that makes people's employee value proposition stronger, makes folks happy, it drives engagement. But then we also say we need to take a fresh look at this role in its entirety.
Gosh, I literally got chills as you were sharing that. I was like, gosh, this has to happen. And I have received pushback over the years when I've introduced similar concepts. They said, number one, we're not there yet. Number two, we just need to take care of the here and now. But there's two questions that I want to focus on. Number one, the governance around this, because when you talk about technology, it screams, IT and groups that are often outside of HR that are impacting work and how work gets done. And the other is the connection between operational workforce planning and strategic workforce planning. Correct me if I'm wrong, there is a relationship there. What you do in the here and now affects downstream, and what you plan on doing downstream affects what you do in the short term. Is that how you see it as well?
I do. Yeah. And you're right. The governance and ownership is a word that we use a lot on the team. Like who owns the plan once it's completed, who owns the execution of that. And that has to be very organizational specific to the organization structure. But I'll say what's interesting about building a workforce planning team in an industry that does not usually do it is I don't have people that have done workforce planning before, right? We do skill-based hiring on my team, and it's worked exceptionally well because we have a diverse set of skills, people from finance, continuous improvement, enterprise analytics, not a lot of we don't have a strong HR background. So we don't actually think of strategic workforce planning as an HR function. We think of it as an enterprise strategic unit. But what we've been talking about on the team as we get everyone onboarded and get momentum is this is simultaneously the best time and worst time to be doing strategic workforce planning. It's the best time because leaders outside of human resources who are unfamiliar with this now immediately get why it's important. It's very in their face, right? Because they look at their turnover, they look at their metrics, they look at their news sources, and they see the great resignation in the headlines every day. From that standpoint, it's the stock price of strategic workforce planning has never been higher, right? Everyone wants it. We get pinged a lot from other organizations saying, how are you doing this? We realize now that we need to do this and we need to take it seriously. It's not a side project. It's also the worst time because of those same dynamics, it's difficult. It's very challenging. So the benefit that we've experienced at Cleveland Clinic is that our leaders in the clinical space, in our executive space now say, I get why this is so important. We don't have to explain our why very often or very in depth. So they say they're open to new methodologies and new data sets that they might not have been in the past. A really crucial thing that we've been laying out as groundwork when we start a planning engagement is you've probably said no to things in the past that you need to reconsider because the chessboard has changed. So if there's probably been discussions in all your organizations about, upskilling, flexible work assignments, internship programs, all the sorts of things that maybe you said no to, or you said not yet, or not now for whatever reason. You need to dust those off. And that's what we're doing, because especially at a place like Cleveland Clinic has been around for 100 years. We've had a lot of exceptional ideas over the years that might just not have been perfect for that time. So we're revisiting those things. And that's gone pretty well for us because people are open to that and they're saying yes. So governance wise, it still is a conversation of, okay, we will bring insights to you, we will bring planning to you, but this is your plan, right? What's helped is that I think the people analytics community, the strategic workforce planning community has upped their game in recent years. And the technology, the data that we bring to the table is more advanced than it was even 5 years ago. So when I go to my, the chair of a clinical institute that does, heart surgery, and they are used to some exceptional data, some exceptional insights, and I can bring them things that they're frankly not used to seeing from human resources. They're not used to seeing exceptional insights from external vendors. So that's another thing that helps us get through that governance hurdle, or that sort of buy-in, that they see what I can bring in terms of, no, I've plotted out the role redesign. I can show you the trends. I can show you the career trajectories. I can show you emerging technology that you're going to be using 3 years from now, and what that means for your roles and your hiring and your retention, all that stuff. And it's a real nice sort of, okay, you're my partner now. And there's that old joke like that we used to be HR with an opinion, right? People analytics or workforce planning, HR with an opinion. It's much more than that now. It's much more of a seat at the table because we have upped our game in terms of insights.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, because I couldn't agree more. And it's also the case where not only do they need us, but they're seeing us as critical to their success and the organization's success, like you were alluding to. But I want to get to the data that you mentioned in a second, but I want to kind of wrap up the governance conversation a little bit, because I want to understand your work day to day. Like, do you have a governance committee? Do you engage your stakeholders on a daily basis, weekly basis? I mean, what's the frequency, the meeting rhythm, and what insight are you generating? Because you mentioned an engagement. Are there projects that you go to, and for who do you do those projects?
Yeah, I'll caveat all of this by saying we're learning as we go. We use a phrase, it's iron sharpens iron, or steel sharpens steel, that every engagement we do improves the next one, right? Because we're still something of a startup. Everything's a startup when your organization is 100 years old. Everything is a startup in comparison, right? We do think of them in terms of engagements, similar to what a consulting firm would, and that's how we're structured. We don't call ourselves consultants because we are Cleveland Clinic caregivers through and through, and we're here for permanent relationships, long-term relationships. But we do have a model of more or less a 3 to 4 month engagement that's broken up into phases of fact finding and initiation, where we determine the clinical institute or the department's strategic goals, what the ground truth is of their people analytics, what can we learn from HRIS about their trends. Then we do a full month of analytic forecasting for those numbers, where we do some simple regression modeling, where we say these are your capacity gaps, your capacity surplus by unit and by role. Here's what it looks like 2 years from now if nothing changes. And then we can also tweak that based on scenarios. For us, healthcare turnover is something that we we stay on top of and tweak those models. But then we also work with some external vendors to forecast talent market trends and also technology change and how that would impact our workforce. So we're able to, within 6 weeks, come back to the leaders, usually less, come back to the leaders of an institute or a department and say, here's what your workforce looks like in, let's say, 2 years or 3 years. And then compare that to, here's what we've heard from you that your workforce needs to look like 2 to 3 years from now. And it usually demonstrates a very clear delta, right? And then we transition into attacking the problem. We have a very clear delineation of, this is the forecast, this is the difference between what you're going to have and what you're going to need. And so now we start working on solutions. And we have a process that we do for, like I was talking about earlier, going through that process: external capacity, internal capacity, technology and redesign. We run that several times until we get that delta down to as close to zero as possible. And so then what are the things that we did? What are the opportunities that we looked at? Was it compensation adjustments? Was it bespoke benefits? Was it establishing a new talent pipeline through an academic partnership? That's just one of those four. That's just external talent. You keep attacking that gap. That's, I think, the name of the game for strategic workforce planning for the foreseeable future. You're going to have a gap. You got to attack the gap and how you do it. So that's what we're doing right now. But we're refining as we go.
Well, let me jump in there if I may, because
Yeah.
as you attack these gaps, as you shared, there are, and I heard you use the word scenarios, and associated with scenarios are certain probabilities. And so how comfortable are your internal stakeholders, those that you are serving, with dealing with this ambiguity? Are they embracing that? Do they understand it? Or do they want you to come with answers and say, just tell me what to do?
They definitely want silver bullets. They want magic wands, but I don't blame them, right?
Yeah.
If you think about what they've been through over the past 2 years, I mean, they have high hopes. When I come and I say I have data and I have, plans, you can't begrudge them for wanting a simple solution right now.
Right.
So, it's change management, because they're also used to very data-rich environments, especially our chairs are doctors, our scientists. So, right. So they want to look at it 6 ways from Sunday. And we can't, there's not enough data on the future. There's no data on the future. So, excuse me, a transition we've had to make is to say, I can't predict down to the individual digit what your capacity gap will be, but I can tell you it's going to be big, right? Yeah, let's not wait until we know specifically in order to take an action.
Well, so let's talk about the data in the balance of our time here. And if you're listening, you, by all means, ask questions. So you mentioned external data sources. Obviously, you're sourcing internally as well. Can you mention some of those, or at least the type of data that is most meaningful to you, given the problem that you're trying to solve?
Sure. I don't rely heavily on internal data. Excuse me one second. My allergies are killing.
It's okay. It's okay. And as you're doing that, I'm going to slip in this question too, because you've used the term capacity. So I'm really particularly interested in, are you measuring capacity in some way? And that translated for me is, at an individual level or a job family level, how much time is actually available for someone to do their priority work.
The benefit of doing this in healthcare, we measure productivity very carefully in the clinical space. Not all industries will do so. I have the benefit that I can measure an employee's productivity very, very carefully. So we have that, but it only tells you some things. In the most part, it tells you how well you budgeted. It tells you, are your predictions correct? It doesn't tell you necessarily how that will change over time in the future. So I don't rely heavily on our internal data sources. I rely much more heavily on external analytics from Talent Neuron, the Gartner product. We also partner with Fathom, the Australian AI company that allows us to forecast change of technology. Those are critical tools for us because if you only use your internal data, you only tell yourself things you already know. And then you also reinforce whatever assumptions in your data. Whenever you use internal data, you're just sort of reminding yourselves of things. You're not learning new things. So we invested heavily in external sourcing, external benchmarking to bring an alternate perspective. And we utilize that heavily.
Let me just give you a clap on that because there's been so much talk over the years around predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics. And personally, I've been jumping up and down. It's like, they take the frequentist approach where you're just taking historical data within a system and you're predicting. So it's perpetuating patterns. And, predictive policing is an example where that's been taken off the table in many cities because, again, it exacerbates a problem, arguably, as opposed to solve for it. So you're bringing in other perspectives, other data that in turn allows you to have some disruptive innovations that are most appropriate, for the system for which you're responsible at that point in time. So, with that, the external data, is that primarily for use for your team? And then you package it in a way that's consumable for your internal customer. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, it's not client facing, I would say. My team uses it to do our forecasts, but then also to identify the opportunities that we should be digging into. Mm-hmm. Role redesign is a perfect example of that. Because we're so specialized, we're just trying to find what is the potential unlock. We don't rely on the data to be that silver bullet. We just want to find what's the thing that we never considered before. That's what external data can bring.
Got it. Well, yeah, I'm getting this question, and it's actually a good segue. And Jamie, I see your question as well. But Evan, here's one publication that I just brought up, and I will let you comment on it, AJ. It's an article you wrote, and it's on strategic workforce planning there at the clinic. Any highlights that you want to call out here?
I think the reason we wrote this was to plant a stake of how proactive this needs to be. Traditional workforce planning is so agile and reactive in a good way, but if you're waiting for the problem to come to you, you're going to be too late. Your talent acquisition function will not be able to hire fast enough, and your training function will not be able to create content fast enough. This is all about forecasting the future and taking action now. And it takes some guts. It's got to be bold. This is where I would say you need to think about selectively out-competing your competitors, right? Where you say, we're gonna pick some things where our workforce value proposition will beat our competitors by a bit, right? By a significant amount. You need to make choices. That's what we're doing at the clinic is we are using forecasts to make choices. I spent a lot of time in my career trying to predict the future, and I think the future is actually more about choice. It's about if you understand what the drivers are at work, you choose your future, and then you create it. Our CEO, Dr. Malevich, says that all the time, invent the future. So I would advocate, don't look for this data and these benchmarking and these sources and publications to tell you the future. They won't. They can't. Nobody can. I would say be smart about what the current trends are, and then determine who you want to be as an organization and invent it, and be smart about inventing it, but create your own future. You won't hear a lot of analytics people tell you that because analytics is supposed to be able to reveal the future and everything, but it can't. It can just give you a window. It can give you a pretty good generalization, and it can do scenario planning, but really you want to be able to allow your executives, your leaders to say, I want to have the workforce that's the best place to work in healthcare. And you say, great, I have 5 ways to do it, right? Yeah. Let's plan it out, right? Yeah. And then here's the workforce you need to make that happen. That's strategic workforce planning to me. It's not predicting the future. It's about creating a pathway to their strategic goals.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. A couple more things, but before we wrap here, and
Yeah.
in response to how you learn, and Innocent, I'm going to give you a shout out. This was his reply, so I appreciate appreciate you for that. But there's a question that came in from Jamie. What amount type of data is included in your models that is entered or provided by employees themselves? So I'm hearing, surveys, are, taking in their desires or ideas,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts there?
In our modeling, none. Right now, it's all HRIS data, external economic data, and things of that nature, financial data. But we do bring into account, we do have a workforce-wide survey annual that we're going to make it more frequent, more like a pulse style survey. I would say in terms of modeling, personal preference, I don't believe heavily in surveys for analytic modeling purposes. Surveys to me are problematic in that regard.
Mhm.
When you want to ask someone a question, they are not just giving you the straight, truthful answer. They're also answering based on what they think you want to hear and how their day is going. Right? Like it's just a problem of asking a human a question. You're not going to get 100% of the truth, even if they're trying to be truthful and complete. So I believe more in observing behaviors to bring into modeling. So, looking at your exit survey data is very useful. But, if you're looking at what the person says is the reason that they're leaving, you could dig into that. There are ways to figure out, is that really the reason that they're leaving? Where are they going? So we do not take employee generated data heavily into account in our models, but we do take employee action data in our models. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, they're voting with their feet, voting with their behaviors in terms of how they're thinking and feeling. So yeah, totally get that. Well, hey, I know as we're starting to wrap up, I just want to highlight something that you that's core to what we're doing, that you all are hiring there at Cleveland Clinic. So I just want to make sure that if you're in the field, that you highlight the career page there at Cleveland Clinic. But the broader question here that I want to ask you as we start to wrap is, what does your team look like, and where do you see it going? Because you mentioned that
Yeah.
this is increasingly about the future of work. It's not just about workforce planning as a discrete activity. What are
Right.
your thoughts there?
Yeah, workforce planning is the our natural entry point to this, but I see big things ahead for this function. We're a relatively large team. There's 15 of us doing strategic workforce planning, but we're also a workforce of 70,000 all over the world.
Mhm.
So it's a complex task, but I think the more that we work, the more we'll be focused on what is the future of healthcare provision, what is the future of nursing, what is the future of telehealth, right? Not to figure out the medicine of it or the science of it, but the people of it, the
Mhm.
people side of it. Workforce planning should be as crucial as a business strategy, a finance strategy, real estate, R&D strategy. But usually it takes a back seat and it's done retrospectively, right? After a business decision has been made. I want to get ahead of that because our workforces are crucial. It's our center of gravity. It's our most important asset, obviously. So I see strategic workforce planning and future of work becoming synonymous within a few years for my team.
Wow. Well, AJ, thank you so much for sharing, and I look forward to hearing how it evolves over the coming months and years, because obviously this challenge is not going away. Arguably, it might be becoming more acute. So we need innovative approaches like you're sharing. How can people learn more about you and what you're doing there at the clinic?
We publish a lot on LinkedIn. You mentioned that article that I wrote for the clinic. We're also creating a narrated animation video that explains what we do, that we're hoping to publish in the next week or so. That is a little bit fun, but also simplifies workforce planning at the clinic. But feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. We're pretty active and hope to be posting more of our things as we go.
All right. Well, AJ, thank you again. Really appreciate you, and congratulations on what you're achieving. I know there's a lot of work to be done. I know in our discipline we don't get a lot of high fives and kudos. So for my little position, I honor your work, and well done, and best of luck to you moving forward.
Thanks so much, Al. This was fun.
All right. Likewise. All right. Be well.
Bye.
Bye.